Cycles are everywhere in Magic the Gathering. That is, if you know where to look. Like a collection of hidden gems tucked away in every set, waiting to be unearthed by those with a keen eye for detail. I've spent the last few weeks digging into countless cycles, poring over articles and interviews to bring you a comprehensive look at one of Magic's greatest design tools. What I found was far more than anything I ever expected. You see, cycles aren't merely an arbitrary set of 5 cards. Rather, they are a physical expression of the color pie, tools for defining factions, a method for guiding players, integral to weaving larger narratives, and part of Magic's greater aesthetic. If that sounds like a lot, that's because it is, and the deeper I got into the research, the more I found out about how important cycles are to this game. So with so much depth to explore, why wait any longer? So to begin, cycles are a group of cards that share either mechanics, mana cost, type, power, toughness, flavor, or some other core concept or intent, all while spanning different colors or combinations of them in their mana cost or their effect. Think of the legendary artifacts from Eldraine, each of which are a legendary artifact from the same set that span different colors. This connection can then take on many shapes, as I like to call it. The first shape to look for when deciphering a cycle is whether it's a loose or tight cycle. This category of cycles dictates the link between the cards themselves, with tight cycles being those cards connected by something concrete, such as type, name, mechanics, and things like that. These are the most common types of cycle you will encounter in Magic, while loose cycles are merely held together by flavor or purpose. Think pivotal moment cards or draft signpost cards. These kinds of cycles can be the hardest to spot, but honestly I find them the most interesting. The next broad category or shape of cycles are that of vertical versus horizontal cycles. Horizontal cycles are the most common, as this is the type of cycle that spans 2 or more colors or combinations of colors, while vertical cycles actually span rarity and often are of the same color. An example of this being the Thought Cycle, which take a single design concept and bump it up in rarity and power. Okay, Editor Caleb coming in, and I know I said that it increased in power. Well, maybe that wasn't the best example, because I mean -4 hand size for a 4/4 with flying. Okay, yeah, old Magic design used to make no sense. The next shape is that of cycles, mega cycles, and mega cycles. Not the best naming convention, honestly, but this category denotes if a cycle is contained within a single set, spans an entire block, or is not restricted by set or block respectively. The final definition comes down to the size of the cycle, as while most cycles come in 5, and it's really what comes to mind when I say the word cycle, the reality is that cycles can be any number of cards over 1. As such, they can be mirrors, like the White and Black Knight, and they can come in 10s, which we usually see in sets based around Ravnica, for instance, with the most recent example being the Surveil lands from Murders at Karlov Manor. As you can see, things aren't so cut and dry when it comes to cycles, and you'll soon come to see, cycles play a major role when it comes to designing Magic the Gathering, even if you may not notice it at first glance.
Why are cycles so important for flavor? Because in Magic, the center of flavor is the color wheel. The colors are best defined not in isolation, but in contrast with one another. Cycles allow us a perfect opportunity to show such contrasts.
You see, cycles are the color pie, because at the heart of designing cycles is drawing out the inherent conflict between each color, by implementing a single concept in varied ways based on the color or combination acting upon it. In this way, cycles are the pie given shape in concrete form. I like the example of the Lorwyn 5, a cycle of planeswalkers from the Lorwyn set who provide an exploration of the methodology to each color. By using cycles in conjunction with the color pie, the designers then lay out how the color pie acts in a mechanical sense. I know on this channel we spend a lot of time talking about the philosophical and flavorful side of the color pie, but the truth is the way that most players interact with it is through the mechanical one. As such, it's important to have cycles that can express the color pie in its varied ways, which does still relate back to the core methodology of those colors as expressed through the mechanical one. What's interesting though is that this literal representation, as showcased by the mechanical color pie in the use of cycles, does feed back into the philosophy and flavor of it as well. You see, by witnessing firsthand through gameplay how each color interacts in a mechanical sense, it becomes evident how each color in combination acts upon the world around it. Consequently, we gain a more comprehensive understanding of each color through the patterns presented in cycles. This is where the significance of cycles comes into play, as they allow the designers to take a concept and play with it in the perspective of a given color. An example that first comes to mind to me are the Gods of Amonkhet. The designing of this cycle plays many roles, but the most evident is in its expression of the color pie, of bringing it to life in a way that players can interact with in a meaningful way. You see, cycles are there first and foremost to enhance our perception and comprehension of the color pie. It lies in the cycle's ability to unite a single abstract concept under the influence of each color. When the designers are building out a world, it's important it's conveyed to the player base in a meaningful way, no matter how deep their interaction with the lore is. As such, the cards are the key component when it comes to defining a plane and its factions to the player. This is where I find cycles to be used most, or at least have their presence most felt. You see, by taking a single concept, whether mechanical or flavorful, and applying it to each of the set's factions through individual cards within a cycle, we get a chance to witness how each one would interact with that given concept. Really, it mirrors how cycles are the color pie brought to life. Their application towards factions bring it closer to the player. A great example of this comes to us from the Streets of New Capenna. This set lays out the leaders of each faction, their hideouts, their henchmen, their methods for removing rivals, and more, all through cycles. This is a case where if a player interacted with only the set and just played with its cards, they would understand the plane without watching any lore videos or reading any short stories. These cycles not only outline the who, where, and what of each faction, but also provide a structured approach for game designers to explore the depth and complexity of each faction's ideology, motivation, and methods, all told through their shared concept given shape across 5 cards. As you can see, just as cycles are the color pie itself brought to life, cycles can be applied on a more granular level to offer us insights into the factions and characters that make up the setting we visit on a given plane by showing us 5 separate views of a single concept. There are cycles that aren't exactly tied together by either mechanics or flavor, but instead by intent. A primary example of such a cycle is what is called the draft signpost cycle. This horizontal cycle comprises 5 to 10 uncommon cards, all tailored for the limited format in mind, as each card within the cycle signals to the player what archetypes are available to draft their decks around. The uncommon rarity being the most important part, as this ensures that players will come upon them in their drafting environment. This sort of thing showcases how cycles can be a tool that the designers can use to interact with the player and guide their experiences further in a gameplay sense, pushing them to the intended avenues as decided by the core mechanics of a given set. Even outside of these limited focus cycles, the designers intend to guide the players into the archetypes they have in mind for a given set are ever felt in other cycles. Something like the cons in the set Fate Reforged guide the players into a specific set of colors and ways of playing their constructed decks, pushing newer players along towards predetermined archetypes or styles of deck building. Think of them more as guides or signposts left by the designers, rather than something that locks down your creativity. For more experienced players, it at least showcases what concepts to expect within the set, which can spark ideas and inspiration all their own. I don't think of these as explicit must build around cycles, but rather a way of the designers to speak directly to the player and inform them what the intent behind the set is. Cycles have long since been an avenue to express Magic's story for quite some time now. In Battle for Zendikar, we were introduced to this concept with the Pivotal Moments cards, cycles of 5 not tied by any mechanical or strictly flavorful themes, but rather in their showcasing of, well, pivotal moments in a given story for a certain set. Though these were hard to distinguish if you didn't ever grab a fat pack for the set, known as bundles now, as these fat packs each contained an insert which listed the pivotal moment cards for that given set. That's why in Kaladesh they shifted to more explicit cycles with the story spotlight cards, but in a bid to help players put these cycles together, they added the story spotlight tag to the bottom of these cards. I personally see this as a huge improvement because Magic the Gathering is always at its best when a player can understand set, setting, and story without having to rely on outside materials and just simply consume the cards themselves to understand these aspects of the game. This concept would then be carried on for several sets, but it became apparent that 5 cards just weren't enough, and a traditional cycle just wouldn't cut it anymore. So in War of the Spark, they threw out the 5 card limit, allowing these cycles to be more fluid and accommodate the story at hand. Even more fascinating was that they split the War of the Spark story spotlight cards into 3 separate cycles by grouping them in acts, which is the one and only time we see this act structure, while the removal of the 5 card limit would carry on into present day, seemingly expanding with each set, culminating in the set Murders at Karlov Manor, which carries with it a whopping 31 card cycle of story spotlight cards. Now, sometimes the story told doesn't even get a spotlight, nor any markers of a greater plot, but instead tell a smaller story of a minor character. One of my favorite instances of these, and possibly the most famous, is the Curse cycle, which all feature a planeswalker with the worst of luck, which itself is a cycle within a cycle and part of a larger Curse of cycle that are all focused on the mechanic of enchanting another player with a negative effect. Stories have always played a big part in Magic's identity, and as such, constructing the game with stories in mind really is what brings the game to life. And because of this, cycles can be more than mechanical or thematic ties, but rather a storytelling device. By placing these story beats directly into cards, we can experience the story firsthand and explore its key moments while simply enjoying this game we love. One might not think of it as such, but cycles are an act of aesthetics through symmetry, a design principle rooted in the abstract ways that humans take in sensory information in a pleasing way without even being directly aware of it. You see, we instinctively are attracted to connections and structure, to parallels drawn whether obvious or not, and cycles fit neatly into how we experience the game from an aesthetic perspective. These are design principles baked into Magic the Gathering, a game that is full of patterns, groupings, and structure. Nothing is some accident thought up on a whim, and cycles fit neatly into this idea. Mark Rosewater spoke at length about aesthetics' role in Magic the Gathering, especially in how cycles play a major part of this aesthetic in his article Zen and the Art of Cycle Maintenance. And while I recommend you read the whole thing, this part of it really stuck with me.
The idea behind it is that many of the things that determine the aesthetics of an item are not things that are conscious to the observer. What that means is that following all of the rules is important even if it's not immediately noticeable by the player. The overall effect will be.
I found this notion to actually mirror my own experience with researching this video, because as you're down in the set digging through all these cards, it can sometimes be hard to spot some of these more obscure cycles, and yet they're there, shaping my experience of the set overall, whether I notice their effect or not. But this concept makes it all the more satisfying to spot these cycles, like a puzzle that locks in its final piece to reveal something beautiful. It's not merely about functionality, It's about creating a visual harmony that resonates with players on a subconscious level. These cycles create a sense of order and balance that is inherently pleasing to the player who is interacting with it. In essence, cycles serve as aesthetic anchors within the vast sea of cards, providing players with familiar patterns to latch onto. They're like the reoccurring motifs in a piece of music, enriching a player's journey and adding depth to their engagement with the game. As Mark Rosewater said perfectly, adhering to these aesthetic principles may not always be consciously recognized by players, but their impact is undeniable. Thank you so much for watching my video on cycles. It has been a long time coming. If you enjoyed this video, then you will probably like this one here on the narrative inherent to card draw. I also want to thank Joriam for lending his voice for Mark Rosewater in this video. Make sure to check out his channel, it's among my favorites. With that, friends, I will catch you in the multiverse. Bye.